at the moment, so it's looking good. So good morning and welcome to the next of the 2023 ZEBRA webinar series, or as referred to as CEBRAnars. My name's Gail Holmick. I'm actually the Acting Principal Director this week for the Innovation Research and Education branch in the Biosecurity Strategy and Reform Division. Quite a mouthful. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, of the many lands on which we meet. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of the land I'm coming from today, and recognise the other families, people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT and region. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I extend that recognition to the traditional custodians of all other lands on which our staff and participants are gathered today, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples attending today's webinars. Before we start, can I just ask everyone, and everyone's looks like they've done it brilliantly, is just to keep your microphones and cameras off, microphones muted. We will be recording today's webinar for those who are unable to make it. There will be an opportunity to ask questions following the presentation. You can either use the hand up gesture or post a comment or a question in the chat. So the Centre of Excellence for Biosecurity Risk Analysis, or CEBRA, is a long-standing biosecurity research initiative and plays a vital role in providing the Australian and New Zealand governments with expert biosecurity risk analysis and advice that helps inform a range of biosecurity risk management activities. So today we've got dual presenters, Dr. Christopher Baker and Dr. Thao Lee, or TK, who will discuss how CEBRA have developed a flexible mathematical model that creates the link between data, evidence and policy for mitigating risks and streamlining biosecurity policy. So Chris is a Senior Research Fellow in Statistics for Biosecurity Risk in the School of Mathematics and Statistics at the University of Melbourne. Received his PhD from that university in 2017. He's also worked at the Pennsylvania State University, the University of Queensland, and the Queensland University of Technology before returning to the University of Melbourne in 2020. So you've done the rounds, Chris, by the looks of it. Primary interests of his include developing and using mathematics and statistics to improve decision-making in complex biological problems. And TK, our second presenter, is a research fellow in the Melbourne Centre for Data Science at the University of Melbourne. Previously a theoretical quantum physicist, having completed a PhD in physics at the University College London in 2020. He then moved into mathematical modelling for epidemiology and biosecurity. So recent research he's conducted includes exploring the relationship between population immunity and future COVID-19 waves, very topical, and working on practical decision problems within biosecurity. So I'll now hand over to Chris and TK to get us underway. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks everyone, or thanks for having us today. Thanks everyone for coming to hear about some of our work. So yeah, TK and I are going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done over the last few years with CEBRA. We're going to cross maybe even 3 or 4 separate projects in this presentation. So I hope you enjoy. Also going to start with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands of which we live and work. Here we're on Wurundjeri country of Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders both past and present and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who are present here today. So we're going to start with just a high level view of biosecurity. Thinking from offshore risk management. So when we have consignments coming to the country, there are things you can do pre-border to sort of reduce or manage risks. We have, from there, we have things coming into Australia, which we think of the approach rate, what percentage of consignments or are contaminated or have some sort of risk associated with them. From there, we would then do some sort of border inspection or treatment or risk profiling to see what comes into the country and how to manage those risks at the border. But then there is, of course, some sort of amount of leakage that we expect to come through still. We don't manage to reduce risk to 0. From there, you might think about any sort of climate suitability or habitat suitability, which would lead to probabilities of pest establishment and potential spread within Australia. And if that's the case, decisions around post-border management and eradication. So that's sort of the high-level picture of how we see sort of the biosecurity system and how we kind of manage or can intervene in different aspects of it. But in today's presentation, we're really going to focus in on this border inspection and treatments part. So we're assuming we know something about the approach rate, and we're trying to understand how that goes through our border system and result in some sort of leakage. So that's the high level picture where we're at. And as you just heard, well, I'm a mathematician, Tika is a former physicist. So we're all about the modeling, and we think about how we can use modeling to help design inspection policies that are efficient and effective. And in saying that, I'm going to emphasize that today's presentation is going to be all about the models and methodologies that we use, and less about specific policies or results. So we're going to take a deep dive into methods. So the general view of or framing for the type of work we've been doing, we want to think about what different management scenarios there are. So that might be what percentage of goods do we inspect, what type of inspections do we use, and say the sensitivities of inspections. We want to take that and put them into some sort of model, which will then tell you about, well, if you make those decisions, what are the risks, how much leakage is there, how much effort does it take to do all these inspections? And then hopefully that can help inform decisions about those policies and what interventions are going to be useful and good to do. Okay, so the work that we're presenting today was really focused about a project that was a CEBRA project focused on sea containers and containerized cargo. But as I said before, we're going to focus on methodology. So there's a range of applications that we think this model could be used for, but that was just what motivated the creation of this work. So throughout this presentation, we're going to be showing lots of pictures of containers, but you could imagine subbing in something else there, whether it be like, I don't know, a fruit or tractors or any other thing, as long as we have data and we're managing something in a similar way. Okay, so as I say, we're going to cover a few topics today, and the end goal is to think about this sort of high-level picture of inspection policies at the border. We've got some containers coming in, and then we're making decisions about what we do with them in terms of treatments or inspections. And at the end, we're going to want some results about, well, how does this policy translate into effort and leakage? So we're going to break this down into a few different aspects. So firstly, we've got a model for the containers. So that's thinking about the approach rate and how that depends on, say, what is the source country of a container. Then we're going to go into the building blocks, so the pathway building blocks. So unpicking what each of these different symbols mean. Then we're going to talk about low risk sampling. So this is some work that TK and I did last year, thinking about sample sizes for when you have a pathway with a low approach rate. We're going to touch on compliance-based sampling, which again is CEBRA's done a lot of work in this area. And then we're going to put it together for a short example at the end. Okay, so let's get into containers. So we wanted to unpick the current risks that are associated with containers and containerized cargo. And the key parts of this is, well, what is the probability that a container is contaminated, and how does that probability depend on its attributes? So by attributes, we mean things like what country did it come from, or what's its destination, or what cargo is inside it, or does it have cargo in it at all? And we found that the probability of contamination does depend on that. So we had to break that down. And a lot of this was in the framing of containers and hitchhiker pests, so giant African snail for context. And on the other hand, we have this desire to develop and simulate inspection policies. So once we have a way of generating or simulating containers, we want to have a modeling framework where we can make decisions depending on the attributes we can allow a variety of different types of inspections or treatment of containers, and we want to be able to evaluate those policies. So we're not going to put up the actual data today, but we wanted to give you just an example of how we think about this data and what it looks like. So on the headings, we have the different attributes of the containers. So we've got a high risk origin is an option, whether it's going to a rural destination, whether it's empty, and whether it had some sort of offshore treatment. And then we have a couple percentages there. First one is the probability of arrival. So that's essentially saying what percentage of containers coming in through the border have that set of attributes. And the last one is probability of contamination. So that's what fraction of those containers have some sort of biosecurity risk contamination that we've detected. So we need all of these mapped out to be able to run this through a simulation model. And again, I'll emphasize that I just sort of made these up for demonstration purposes. So you can see how it goes through them all. As part of the CEBRA project that we did, we analysed container data from the border. So when we were sort of involved in those projects, we were using real data for hypothetical example. And the people that were involved in doing that are all pictured on the screen. So Andrew Robinson, the director of CEBRA, David Rolls, John Baumgartner, Edith Arndt, Anka Hania, and Aaron Dodd when he was still part of CEBRA. And on the right, we've got just another hypothetical example of what it looks like when we're thinking of, say, contamination rate and high risk origin. Okay. So once we have generated or gained this data about the probability of contamination and where containers are coming from, we can then simulate new containers that have the same set of attributes. So just an example, we might have a container that we give it this set of attributes of high risk origin, offshore treatment, rural destination, and empty, whether it's empty or not. But then there's also this hidden field of whether it's contaminated or not. So for this one, we say it's false. And over here, we've got another container which maybe has some sort of true hidden contamination. And so once we can generate these sort of simulated containers, we can run it through an inspection pathway and inspection policy and evaluate those policies. So we create digital containers, and then we can send them down these pathways, deciding whether what inspections or treatments happen to them, depending on whether some sort of high or low risk, or other decisions based on attributes. Okay, so we have a few different elements that we'll need to be able to construct these pathways. Firstly, there's the containers, which I've just described. Then we have decision nodes, so that splits containers, saying if it's a high risk source, it goes this part of the pathway. If it's low risk, it goes a different part. We have inspection nodes. So these will be, when a container arrives at one of these nodes, it'll get inspected by some sort of algorithm. It may be everything gets inspected, or just some fraction of the containers that arrive at that inspection node get inspected, or something different. And lastly, we have a treatment node. And the main difference between a treatment node and an inspection node is that we don't necessarily get data about contamination from treatment nodes. It just removes contamination rather than providing information as well. So once we have these, we rearrange them, we link them together with arrows, and then we can send containers through them. And once we've simulated these containers going through a pathway and different types of inspections, we get records of what happened to the containers, what we learned, and we can summarize those data and understand about how effective our policies are. I think with that, I'm going to pass over to TK to talk a little bit of detail about how we model these inspection methods and set up the sample sizes.
Yeah, so one of the easiest ways to have an inspection algorithm is just to say, sample a fixed percentage, say like every 10th container, or a fixed number, so like each day we'll do 10 containers. But that said, CEBRA has developed two we're talking about here, two methods to sample with kind of risk-based sampling. So one of them is compliance verification, low volume sampling, which is basically when you have low risk and low rate of sampling. And another is compliance-based sampling, called the continuous sampling protocol, where if there is no compliance, then you have more inspections. And if there is compliance, then you have less inspections. So first, we'll talk about compliance verification for low-risk pathways. So this is typical verification inspections. So it's just to check and ensure that the pathways are still low risk. So to do this, we kind of have this belief distribution, and you have two thresholds. One is T change, which helps us detect small increases in leakage, and one is T risk. This is our low risk threshold. We do not want the risk to rise above this level. We have a sampling method, which I won't talk about here, but it does have some properties. It allows us to incorporate prior knowledge. So if we know that this pathway has been very low risk in the past, then we can use that information in the present. This method gives us confidence that we are below the low risk threshold. So it selects enough samples, like a small number, but enough to have confidence. And the more confident we are, the less sampling we do. This means that if our tolerance is very high, then we would do less samples, or the prior data shows that we were very, very low risk, then we would sample less samples in the next time period. It also can detect when our risk is rising. So if it is potentially becoming no longer low risk, we would be able to still see that, even though we have a relatively low number of samples. And we kind of have this color system. So your pathway is considered green if we are very confident that we're under that T change level. Orange if we're still confident we're under T risk, but not fully confident about how low it is. So at this point, we would change and inspect more in the next time period. And the last one is red. So that means that we are no longer confident we are under the low risk threshold, and then some action should be now done on this pathway, say extract out what is now high risk, and then we'll continue on. So our method allows us to sample enough to confidently correctly rate the pathway if it rises above T risk, which on the converse side means that we are also confident that we are below T risk as well, to get the green color. So this is basically a simulated survey. What would happen if you had done 5,000 samples in the past and you know you only had 6 leakages in those past 2 quarters? So you can see here there are different colored bars as well as different dots. And so these are different colors, and this is the number of samples we took. You see that when we get an orange sample, an orange color, the next time period we sample more because we are now like unsure, so we want to check. After we check, it's okay, so we sample less again. We also have this bare sampling volume. So if we say allocated a fixed or 1,500 samples for the pathway, then we don't have to sample that amount. We could use this extra sampling volume for target sampling, say for emerging biosecurity risks. Now this is a simulated survey for when something bad happens in quarter 5, the leakage increases, but the rate of contamination increases. And you can see that even though we sample less than 500, we can still see that in quarter 5, we sample enough to find that there is an elevated risk. We have now in color red, and so action needs to be done. So this work is now a preprint, which is out now. It's called adaptive sampling method to monitor low risk pathways with limited resources. If you want to find more about it, check out this paper or contact us. The next method I'm going to talk about is compliance-based intervention scheme, which is basically behind CEBRA's, which the department uses. So this is one of the simpler versions of it, CSP1. In this, we start with consensus mode, where we sample 100% of inspections. Then if you pass some CN, so clearance number of consecutive assignments, say 10, so if 10 of the inspections are all good, then you would then move into monitoring mode, where you only sample 20% of incoming containers or items. And basically, you stay in this mode until you have a failed inspection. When you have a failed inspection, you go back into full census mode where you can inspect everything, and so on and so forth. So basically, if your pathway is very contaminated, you always stay in census mode, you sample 100% of everything. But if your pathway is like very clean, then you sample only 20%. And so this work was done, written up in this paper, this report here, which, yeah, so by Susie and others. How do we choose parameters? There are actually many parameters in the schemes, such as the number of inspections you need to pass before you enter into monitoring mode, how much you monitor in monitoring mode as well. And the parameter choice is affected by many things, such as including the number of inspections done or the number of inspections you want to do, number of inspections saved, and the amount of leakage you would accept or not accept, as it were. So these are some plots that we kind of made. What we see is that these are different clearance numbers, so different numbers of inspections that you have to pass before you enter low monitoring mode. You see that different clearance numbers lead to different leakages throughout the system. So if you say if you're needing 5 inspections, you only need to pass 5 inspections before you enter monitoring mode, then you have like 8% leakage compared to if you have to inspect 15 first. And same down here, you can see that like obviously if you have a lower clearance number, then you expect less samples. And eventually when the approach rate is very high, so when the contamination is very high, then it doesn't really matter what parameters you choose, you just inspect all the time because you're always hitting into non-compliant containers at that point. And then lastly, just to touch on treatment nodes. Like Chris said, they're meant to just reduce contamination without detecting contamination. So this includes container cleaning. So that's basically this node. We just have a probability of how good your treatment is at these nodes. So,
thank you, TK. So you've seen from that every one of these boxes or building blocks is basically an entire project, or maybe even multiple projects behind them. So there's a lot of thought that's gone into each of them and understanding how they can be used. But what we wanted to do with this project, what's really nice about this project, is we brought them all together. We've taken all the different pieces that exist and brought it into one simulation model so we can understand how they fit in and how changing one of them will affect the system leakage and how that will depend on the rest of the policy. So we're just going to run you through one hypothetical example of putting these together that uses all of them, and it's based on that example probability tables that I showed you at the start, to just give you an idea of how you might, or how someone might use this type of modeling to explore policy options and understand the value of different types of inspections. So here's just an example. We have over the left input containers, and the first thing here we're going to ask is, does this come from a high-risk source country? And we've said high-risk source here is just a general framing, but this might be, say, the CAL country list, country of action list. So we say yes or no, and if we follow the yes pathway, we might then ask if there's been some sort of offshore treatment. So here you might imagine the sea container hygiene scheme, some sort of offshore treatment. And we might say, yes, if it's had this offshore treatment, we're going to take some sort of verification inspection on that. If no, then we're actually just going to ask, is it going to a rural destination? And if it is going to a rural destination, we're going to inspect everything. But if it isn't, so if the high-risk source has not had offshore treatment, is not going to a rural destination, well, then we'll do an onshore treatment and then do compliance-based intervention inspection. On the other hand, if the container isn't coming from a high-risk source, we'll then decide on whether it's empty or not. If it is empty, we'll just do a verification inspection, and if it's not empty, we'll do again a compliance-based intervention scheme inspection. And so when we take 10,000 simulated containers and put it through this policy, we get answers. So if we see how many containers are going to each different node, how many inspections are being done at each of the nodes, how much contamination is found through those inspections, and how much leakage there is. And lastly, how many containers were treated. I think that is actually a truth of how much contamination is removed through treated containers. So in reality, we wouldn't actually know that number, but we can spit it out of the model anyway. So it's a lot of information, but something that you might notice here is this verification low risk node is actually seeing a lot of leakage and a lot of contamination going through it. And so from that, we might think that maybe this policy isn't great and we shouldn't be sending those containers to just a verification inspection, because we're deciding from our information that that's actually not a low risk pathway. So we're going to move that up and send those to the compliance-based risk inspection node instead, the one above it. And so then we can run the model again. We no longer have number 5, that verification of low risk, because we've pushed that into number 4, and we've got different numbers of inspection, different amounts of leakage. And then we can start to compare. We can say, well, on the original pathway policy, how many inspections were there? How much leakage was there? And compare that to removing that compliance verification node. We do more inspections and there's less leakage. So it demonstrates a trade-off, but we're always going to be. That as you do more inspections, there's going to be less contamination coming through as leakage, but it's going to take more effort. And so that's where we need to really start thinking about how this fits into the broader scope of modelling and decision making. So this model just takes an approach rate and you can give it a policy, and it'll tell you what the leakage is, but it won't necessarily, it doesn't map it all the way through. So CEBRA does have the value model, which we can start to quantify this sort of how leakage, I guess the impacts of leakage on Australia. So we haven't linked it through at the moment, but that's where we need to go to really start to be able to do a trade-off more accurately and say, well, what level of leakage is, I guess, cost effective and which policies will give that in the best way. So to wrap up, the modelling that we've done and shown you today allows us to explore the potential impacts of altering an inspection policy. And that, when we say impacts, it's both thinking about leakage, but also inspection effort. And each one of those inspection nodes that we've talked about might be different in terms of who is doing it. So there's the AAs who do inspections, there's staff who do inspections. So not just breaking it down into inspection effort, but who's doing that, and that's going to have different policy implications. We can quantify the value of adding a new decision node or further risk stratification. So we spoke about these high risk, say, deciding a high risk source location will send containers to a certain type of inspection. But there's often talk about, well, let's break risk down into more, low, medium, high, or we could even define it into more levels than that. And through this type of modelling, we can actually quantify, well, what does that get you in terms of either safe inspections or risks about leakage, to decide whether that's help decide whether that's a pump that's worth taking. And as I said previously, this approach combines a lot of different pieces of analysis into a cohesive picture of border inspection policy. So we can bring it all together and, losing my words on this one. But make sure that we're taking all the work that CEBRA has done in the past and bringing it into one place so that it all works together. I think that's our last slide. So thank you for everyone who's come today and everyone who's worked on this project, both at CEBRA and all of our colleagues at the department. And we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris and TK. That's very informative. Certainly, I learned quite a lot from that around the process. Also, there's a lot of decision making still to happen in the space moving forward. I'll just open the floor for questions if people want to either put their hand up or pop something into the chat. And I'll give you a few seconds. While we're waiting, I might just pop the first question in to you both. So I think you've probably touched on this a little bit, but I mean, how can uncertainty and variability in data and modelling be accounted for when evaluating the robustness of inspection policies?
That's a great question. So through this sort of framing, what we'd do would we could create different sets of simulated containers with slightly different profiles and run that through to be able to understand how sensitive those results are to those changing containers and what the different, say, approach rates might be.
Thank you. And probably following on from that, we've got a lot of stakeholder input and expert knowledge out there, and how can that be integrated into the model, I guess, to ensure that the policies are aligned with real-world needs and challenges?
Yeah.
So throwing a few dizzy at you.
So a lot of what we spoke about today was pretty data-driven in terms of, so especially what TK spoke about with the low-risk inspections. So we would take previous data that has come through to then inform what level of sampling we need to be confident that it remains low risk. But if there isn't data that already exists, say if we're taking in a new bit of a pathway and wanting to do low risk inspections on that, that's a place where expert opinion or expert elicitation would be a good way to start to inform our prior belief in what approach rate might be on a pathway. So I might say, well, we don't actually have data on this, but if we come to, I guess, an informed decision about what we think that is, we can encode that belief into a probability distribution and put that into the model to then recommend sampling that's contingent on that belief.
No, sounds great. Thank you. Any questions from the floor? I'll say the floor in the virtual world. So Josh has asked in the chat, is the code for the model publicly available?
Publicly available, part of it. So there's a few pieces to it. The CEBRAnar part, which is the report that Susie led. There's an Excel tool that's available, which I believe is public. On the sampling, the number of samples for the low risk pathway, that's up, isn't it?
Yes, it's on the GitHub repo.
Yeah, so if you get to our paper or our preprint, that links into the GitHub and that code is available. And the whole holistic simulation code isn't publicly available yet, but the department has it. So if you're in the department, you can get access. And I might get in contact with me if you want to do that, and I can direct you. But we are working on making a public version of that. The only reason not public yet is that there's a few things involved with that project, which we sort of class as sensitive or has very specific departmental lingo in it, and we want to make a general version that is accessible and public.
Okay, that sounds great. Sounds like a lot of people probably have access within the department at the moment as well, so that's great. Follow-up question from Vicky. I don't know, Vicky, if you wanted to jump on and ask, or if you're happy for me to.
Hey guys, very sorry I came in late. And thank you very much for the presentation. Thanks, Gail. My question, I'm not expecting an answer, but I would like to know, excuse me, that it's on everybody else's radar. We try to measure performance. So, are we looking at leakage? Is that really an indicator of performance, or is it our reduction in the approach rate? Can we influence that internationally? How do we influence that and reduce that? I mean, I see that as a performance measure, but can we measure that, and can we show our influence from an education and engagement perspective, perhaps internationally? Can we reduce some of the risks coming our way, or are there other mechanisms to improve our performance measures? So from a traveller perspective, it's all good and well to say, we're not finding anything in the airports at the moment, so obviously we're managing biosecurity risk because we haven't found any, which we know is not true. That's a complete hypothetical, but in terms of the KPIs, yes, we want to reduce the level of what we're finding, But on the flip side, I could reduce that simply by not looking for it. Do you get what I mean? So how do we develop those performance indicators? Not an answer for right now. It's a little bit of a complex project, but I imagine you guys are thinking about this too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to unpack there. It's a great question. Maybe I'll start with partly like sort of the offshore measures or offshore work isn't directly in the model that we've spoken about today, but in that model framework, you could ask sort of hypothetical questions. So suppose I could do something in another country which would reduce the contamination rate by half. What would that get me, given my border inspection policies?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other part of it that I think is worth mentioning here is that we haven't modelled the effect of that policy on other countries. So you're exactly right in that some of these policies that we use, such as the compliance-based intervention scheme, sort of actively provides motivation for other people to bring in clean containers or clean goods. And so there's a feedback loop there that comes in. And so we haven't actually coded in that feedback and behavioural change loop into this model. And that's something that I'm really interested to explore in the future. Absolutely right about the performance measures, and really key to think about what
what do we want to hang our hat on? Like, what do we want to say? Yeah, we're going to achieve this, but is it really a measure of reduced biosecurity risk?
Yeah, no, that's part of, I know Susie Hester thinks about that sort of thing a lot. Like, what does a KPI incentivize? As you say, if you're incentivizing, well, let's just close our eyes and not inspect. That's not the right thing.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got to run to another meeting, but that was great. Apologies, I was late, but it was a really good piece. Thank you all.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks for your question.
Another question come through from Alison Greening. I don't know, Alison, do you want to pop on and ask the question? I'm happy to, if you'd rather not.
Yeah, sure, I don't mind. Hi. So if the containers to be sampled are less than 100%, who would be responsible for selecting those containers? I know it's a bit of an operational question. I work for the technical response and management team in the audit insurance branch, so we have a lot of operational sort of responsibilities as well. So just keen to know sort of your take, and if you've sort of built that into your model, or if it's not something that you would consider at that level.
Yeah, it's not something that's specifically in the model. From what I had understood, especially when it came to the low risk sampling and sort of compliance verification sampling, that containers were randomly flagged as to be inspected for compliance verification. And then those inspections would happen if the container wasn't, unless there was something overriding it in terms of maybe it's a high risk source, then it would go away. But if it then turned out that we wouldn't inspect it otherwise, it would go into compliance verification inspection. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure operationally how all that works, except for that we would assume it's a random sampling. But saying that, sure. I know that there are some sort of restrictions that make it not quite random, so there might be certain limits on inspecting, on how many you would inspect within a certain time window from maybe the same commodity or the same broker or something like that.
Because that sort of thing would perhaps have an effect on your figures, would change. I don't know if you're aware of the prawn issue a few years ago with sort of sampling and things like that. So it was, I was just interested to know whether or not there was another formula or some sort of equation that you have sort of built into that could prevent any, I guess, sort of on the ground sort of interference of selecting, favourite containers. Yeah,
I think it's a good point. And as far as I know, it's selected in the system, but is business not 100% random? It's something that we do need to take account of when we're analysing the data, trying to estimate probabilities. But from the specific data sets that we were using, we don't think there was anything too hairy in there. So that's not something we addressed in this work. It is a general point, absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. And look, apologies, I did miss the beginning. I had real difficulties in getting in, so I'm going to have to go back and actually watch your presentation from the beginning to sort of get the whole sort of concept. But from what I listened to and saw was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Josh had a follow-up question around your input variables to the model. Don't know, Josh, did you want to jump on the screen or prefer me to keep going? Can't hear you, Josh, at the moment.
Oh, how about now?
Oh, now we can, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, how did you decide what input variables to include in your simulation? Was it based on feedback from the inspectorate on what mattered for whether a pest was coming to the country or not? Or was there some sort of data behind these are the variables that seem to matter the most for whether or not a pest is in that container?
Yeah, I think that in all these projects, we or CEBRA had access to the data. So we didn't show the data here because obviously that's sensitive, but like in like the C container pathways, we had like inspection probabilities and inspection sensitivities even for like different types of inspections. And we also had like prior data for the low risk pathway, which is on air cargo, but like still that data basically. So Fisher assets, yeah, we had data from DAF about what to parameterize all the parameters and values as.
Yeah, I think part of in how coming down into how many attributes you use, every time you add an attribute, it doubles the length of your list of how many combinations of attributes there are. And so part of that was data driven about making sure that there was sufficient data in each one of the boxes. And I think that's how we ended up with around 4.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, thanks, Josh. Marco's just put a couple of comments in, just obviously following on from the inspection imperfection, I guess, topic that was discussed or flagged by Alison. So no further questions there. So if there's no further questions coming through, I might just thank everyone. Thank you, Chris and TK, for coming through. Oh, Josh has got his hand up again.
Yeah, sorry, one follow-up question. So this is a simulation model for, if I understand correctly, it's a simulation model for how kind of effective the policies around inspection are, given like the kind of leakage rate that you're comfortable with. Have you thought about using a similar model to predict or like highlight what inspections actually need to be inspected based on like where they're coming from, where they're going, some of the same input variables you've used in your simulation model?
I think, so broadly we're thinking about it as, I think as general as we can as we're moving towards making it public and publishing it. The work was originally done in the context of hitchhiker pests and the risk and control framework. And so even though we spoke about just containers then, that work did consider external contamination, internal contamination, and goods contamination all separately. Yeah, thinking about as many different aspects to it as we can is useful because there's nothing specific in the model which says like this has to be a container, it has to be good. So yeah, that's a really good point. We'll definitely keep thinking about what those applications could be.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks,
It sounds like we've thrown a few questions your way for consideration as well. So hopefully that's been helpful. A big thanks, Chris and TK, for joining us today, and everybody else who joined today. Just a reminder, the recording will be sent out to everybody in due course. So you'll have some of the links that TK did reference throughout as part of that presentation as well. Just flagging, our next CEBRAnar is on the 26th of October, which will feature Evelyn Mannix, who's detailing new developments in label efficient computer vision methods and their application to marine biosecurity. Quite a mouthful there. But thanks everyone, and Chris and TK, so much appreciate your time today taken out, and it's been very informative and helpful. I think you may have a few more questions come your way or some information following this, but we'll certainly share the feedback, and there's a number of claps coming through from the audience. So thanks everyone, we'll give you 15 minutes back in the day. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye.